caring for our land. Growing our essentials. Cultivating our future. Every producer leaves a legacy. Our amazing grasslands.
My dad and I have been farming together since I got out of college, and that was in 2013. We do corn, beans, wheat, cover crops. We have cattle and sheep, hogs, chickens. We try to integrate everything that we do, getting cattle out on cover crops, getting them out on all of our fields, and trying to improve our soil health is kind of our number one priority around here.
The first year, the idea of the cover crops was that we were going to get a little bit of grazing out of a wheat stubble field before corn stalks were available. And so the first year it worked wonderfully because the cover crop grew up darn near waist high, and we put the cattle out there and they got a lot of feed value out of it. And then for about 3 years in a row, it was dry after wheat harvest and we couldn't get a cover crop established, we couldn't get anything growing, but we kept trying it. Our goal is to extend our grazing season so that we don't have to feed any stored forages. And last year, I believe we've had to feed for 45 days. We couldn't get anything out of the fields for the cattle to graze at that point. But this year, we've got like 6 different things going on for the cover crops that we planted. We had some oats that we had this year, and after harvest, we planted that to a full season cover crop. At the same time that we planted the oats, we put in 4 varieties of clover, which got established. So by the time the oats was harvested, that was already growing. And so that's going to be our first forage to graze this fall. And then after wheat harvest, we plant turnips and radishes and allow the volunteer wheat to come up. That isn't growing very well. We had kind of a cool September into October and didn't get a lot of growth out of that. We also had about 100 acres of crop ground that was too wet to plant the corn. So about the 4th of July, we got into that and seeded it all into a cocktail of cover crops. One of the new things we're kind of excited about for the future is going into standing corn when it's less than knee high and seeding some cover crop into that. That'll kind of go dormant over the summer, but as soon as the corn starts to dry out in the fall, it starts to grow again. We're hoping that'll give us a little protein boost in our corn stalks so that we can graze longer in corn stalks every winter. The land we're talking about here is the farm that I grew up on. My dad bought the farm in the late 50s, and it was all crop ground. And he struggled for 20 years to farm it, and I tried to farm it for a few years, and then he and I put most of it into CRP, and it ended up staying in CRP for 20 years. And we planted maybe 4 or 5 species, and most of it for the CRP program. I believe this is the 10th year that it's been out of CRP. And since then, every year we see a little better diversity in the plants that are in the pastures, and we get a little more forage out of it.
By taking our CRP and putting it directly into pasture, we were qualified for some programs through NRCS and Game Fish and Parks, and they cost shared putting in water lines. We have this 1-inch plastic pipe running to all the paddocks, and we run them along the fence line between 2 areas so we can utilize that one water line better, and we can use it on both sides of the fence. We don't have to have as many lines that way. There's just one centralized well that supplies all of our paddocks. So our cattle are drinking out of portable water tanks that are on wheels, and they just have a float, and we have quick couplers, and so they're drinking the cleanest water that they can drink.
We try not to have the cattle on a given paddock for more than at most 48 hours, and then they're moved and that paddock gets to rest for at least 30 days, and we prefer 45 days. And the fact that you're allowing every species to come back every time you graze it means that the cattle can't take out their favorite grasses and leave the weeds. So the soil over the last 1,000 years has got a really heavy load of hard seed that's been there for a millennia, and those seeds are being allowed to germinate now and come up, and we're seeing a lot of native warm season grasses show up in pastures that have never been seeded to it, and when I was a child those species weren't out there. It's kind of exciting. Every year we're finding new things. Somebody's come up with an innovation we didn't hear about before, and it's like, how can we use that on our farm? And it keeps us going. The idea that when I'm gone, there might be a legacy here, and it might go on for a few more generations. That's in the back of my mind.
Seeing the diversity in both plants and animals on the Little family outfit is inspiring and a testament to that operation's generational resiliency. Coming up, we'll see how some others are introducing new grazing animals to fight back against weeds. Not only are they saving time and money, but they just may have found another reliable income stream as well.
I'm Garnet Perman. I'm married to Lyle Perman, and we live on Rock Hills Ranch near Lowry, South Dakota. Early on, I don't remember if it was late 70s or early 80s, we had a large western snowberry infestation on our ranch. You know, we wanted to get rid of it. We knew it was something cattle didn't eat, and we had an aerial sprayer come in and just blanket spray our pastures. And we're really unimpressed with the results. What we found is that we killed a lot of trees, we killed a lot of broadleaf plants that, you know, like wildflowers and things like that. And we didn't really affect the western snowberry at all. It knocked it back a little bit, but a year or two later it was back full bore again. And so with the results that we saw, we said, well, we're never gonna do that again. So since then, we haven't done aerial spraying, we do spot spraying, but have tried really hard not to do large-scale chemical applications.
Some of the concerns that I had with chemical use for noxious weed control is it really didn't seem like we were gaining anything. We were losing diversity and still having a weed issue. Especially on our native prairies, we would go in there, it didn't really matter what kind of chemical we were spraying, and you would go back the next year, still have the weed problem, and you would stop seeing the prairie plants that you always used to see in the past.
So one of the potential negative impacts we see from spraying broadcast over your entire land is you really take out those native wildflowers. We call them forbs. And those forbs play a really critical role in the overall diversity of the grasslands. They support not only pollinators, native pollinators, a lot of their seeds support grassland nesting birds. And the pollinators actually themselves, or the other insects that rely on those flowers, are another food source for grassland nesting birds. So you kind of see this negative cycle of ongoing impacts from one decision to spray one weed that you really didn't want in your pasture. And it has this long lasting effect of impacting things you really didn't think about impacting. And that starts at the plants that are growing out there and the soil that they're growing in, and it ends all the way really at us, you know, and the stuff that we're eating and enjoying, but you know, through there it goes through insects and birds and the whole ecosystem.
Our grasslands, you know, especially in the prairie pothole region, have the embedded wetlands, right? We're like a giant sponge for cleaning the water. So the less grass we have, the less wetlands we have, the more sedimentation and those sorts of things get into our water systems. And that just doesn't affect here in the northern Great Plains. You know, that trickles down the Mississippi River and then causes issues further south as well.
Broad scale use of chemical on, you know, just broadcasting over the whole pasture is something that really doesn't fit what we're trying to accomplish as far as having a healthy forage base. Yeah, we'd be taking out our problem plants, but we'd be taking out a bunch of beneficial ones as well, so that doesn't meet our environmental goals. For several years we've been thinking about, you know, what about like goats or sheep or something that would eat this stuff? And this year we finally took the leap and made it happen, and so far I've been really happy with how that's gone.
The reason we thought about bringing sheep back into the operation was twofold. Number one, diversification in income streams. Let's try and get another species in, but probably more importantly, they utilize different plants than the cattle do. We are having problems with a particular forb that's not native called leafy spurge. And we knew sheep had a history of being a good controller for plants such as wormwood sage. We didn't really know too much about western snowberry or buckbrush, but we did know a little bit about the leafy spurge. But what's kept us from getting into the sheep was our concern about fencing and predators. And I'm happy to say that the Van Wells have solved both of those problems by providing us with a shepherd, Jesus. He herds the sheep, but we're also learning a little bit more about what it's going to take to contain the sheep when he isn't herding them. So it's been a learning curve in the 2 months that we've had them, but so far we've been very pleased with the results.
You look at the impact of sheep on the landscape, and we compare the pounds a square inch of pressure on the soil on their hooves as compared to a cow, much less deep soil impact. Sheep have a different way of digesting ruminantly than cattle, and much like deer put out a pellet, so it has a different way of decomposing and going into the soil. So, you know, again, our prairies out here evolved under those multiple species of grazing, and if we can go back to those types of thoughts and emulate some of that, I think we have a great opportunity to not only provide income and profitability, which has to be the foundation, but also ensure a sustainable, regenerative type of productive agricultural enterprise.
This is so not a new concept. We've been doing targeted grazing for many, many years. And in fact, if you look back historically, what's happened with weed populations, how they've exploded exponentially, and I mean plants like leafy spurge, spotted knapweed, and what's happened with sheep numbers across the West is how they've gone down dramatically since World War II. And I am a firm believer that the loss of the diversity of grazing animals on our landscapes has resulted in that ability of those invasive plants to really take over an ecosystem.
We're happy to have people over and talk to them and you know, show them what we're doing. We do it partly because, one, it's our way of giving back. We're so blessed to be here. This is our way of giving back. So hosting a tour or just having individual people come is, you know, it's something we enjoy doing and something I feel is really important.
I'm Randy Schultz. This is my wife, Jean. We're in Western Springs, South Dakota, in Gerald County. and we're on the ranch my dad purchased in 1995. It's a cow-calf and hay ranch. There's some farm ground.
I actually grew up in Wessington Springs at the edge of the hills. My first husband and I, we ranched northwest of town, and we raised our 3 kids out there. It's a wonderful place for kids. They learn a lot of responsibility. They grow up to have a good work ethic. My daughter is back farming, ranching, raising cattle and performance horses where she grew up northwest of town. The boys still farm. They've purchased acres of land out there, and in their second job is farming. The cross fencing was something new to me when Randy and I were first married. It's just way different because there was so much flatter land up there than in comparison to Turtle Peak.
Right after we came, we got involved with cross fencing. The original ranch here had really only 3 pastures, an 800-acre pasture, a 500-acre pasture, and this calving quarter, we call it. That's about a quarter, 160 acres. Through NRCS, we were able to cost share and divide up the ranch. Moving the cattle around, you know, you get better use of the land. We're running about 170 pairs right now. That seems to be a pretty good capacity for the place. We start the cattle in the spring on a pasture that's heavily bluegrass and brome. Well, that bluegrass is not palatable very long, so that's a good place to start them. We don't mind beating up the bluegrass and brome. After several years, though, in this first pasture, the big blue stem in particular came back. You get more diversity with your cool season and warm season grasses as you move your cattle or have shorter duration grazing. If the cattle are on the same pasture, they're going to keep eating their favorite plant, and those plants will decrease, and the less desirable plants will come in. Moving the cattle around in smaller paddocks just increases the diversity of the species of grass. We had about almost 4 miles of cross fencing cost shared. I think we're up to about 11 different pastures that are somewhere around 200 acres. I've got a rotation, and I've rarely changed it. I know it's good to change these rotations, but we've just got into a routine that benefits us. When we first moved here, gathering the cattle in the fall was quite a job. We maybe needed 7 to 10 horsemen up here to get them out all these gulches. And so I will say that the cross fencing really helps with gathering your cattle.
And you know, they get to a point where they want to move, so it's really easy to move them now.
Yeah, you pretty much just open the gate. The water is another story. When we moved here, it was very similar to what we see this summer. All the lakes are full, the dams are running over, very wet. And that's how it was designed. When NRCS came out and we drew out the cross fencing, well, we had all these natural lakes and dams and dugouts. Well, the extreme dry and the extreme wet, it's been the cycles. For instance, Baker's Lake has been full 3 times and completely dry twice. So you go from a cycle of everything being full to everything being nearly dry. So we did not do enough water lines, and we did not foresee the dry years when we did this. So we did an emergency pipeline clear down to Baker's Lake when that lake was dry. And so we had to kind of adjust things as we went along. We should have brought Roger Dwyer out, the previous owner, and he could have told us that, no, you're not going to have water there every year. That's going to dry up. So the water resources weren't developed the way they should have been right to start. So water is the complete key. The more water you can pipe, or the more piped water as opposed to dugouts or dams, you want clean water for your cattle. And so that wasn't perfect. We kind of learned as we went along. We weren't supposed to have anything in one of these historic lots for more than 45 days, which we didn't. This little backgrounding lot is called a clean water diversion. Let's say you get 3 inches of rain in a single storm. The only water that would go downstream would be the water that actually falls right in the feedlot, but we have a grass buffer on the downstream part of the feedlot to filter out anything that would fall directly into the feedlot, and then anything west of the feedlot goes in this diversion around it. The story of this ranch is all the different cost shares we've had. Started off with South Dakota Game Fish and Parks helping us with the deer depredation. U.S. Fish and Wildlife helped us with this dam down south, and of course NRCS through EQIP program, we did these water lines and all these cross fences. So that was huge. The NRCS was the big player in all of this, and they also helped us with our backgrounding lot. I don't know how we could have done any of this without these cost share programs. We were able to start the year, everybody got their crops in pretty much, which we couldn't do last year. So we've had more than ample rainfall. You don't see the pastures this green in July very often. All the dams are full. It's more than a good day. It's been a good summer.
With a lot of hard work and partnerships, the Schultzes are now able to rotate pastures more frequently, increase their native grass species, and need less help moving their cattle. That doesn't just make for a good summer, that makes for a good life.